Hello and welcome to the 810th meeting of the Economic Club of New York. I'm Barbara Van Allen, President and CEO of the club. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone this afternoon. Before we begin, I want to extend a warm welcome to students joining us from the CUNY Graduate Center and Columbia Business School, as well as members of the 2025 class of fellows, a select group of diverse, rising next-gen business thought leaders. The Economic Club of New York is proud to stand as the nation's leading nonpartisan platform for discussions on economic, social, and political issues. We've been doing this for more than a century, and today we're honored to carry that tradition forward and welcome our guest, John Avlon. John's an award-winning journalist, author, and media executive. He's the former editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast and served as a senior political analyst and anchor at CNN, where his reality check commentary series won a New York Press Club award. He currently hosts the solutions-focused podcast, How to Fix It on the Bulwark, a longtime civic leader. He chairs the Citizens Union, New York's oldest good government group. He's the author of 6 books, including Lincoln and the Fight for Peace and Washington's Farewell. A passionate advocate for bipartisan solutions, he co-founded the No Labels movement and has spoken across the country on strengthening the political center. He's a graduate of Yale University and Columbia Business School. Today's program will begin with opening remarks from John, followed by a fireside chat where we're honored to have Katya Porzuchansky, the New York bureau chief, as our Bloomberg News moderator. In addition, we'll be using the chat box for the conversation, and you can enter your questions directly for their consideration, time permitting. As a reminder, the discussion is on the record, and we do have media tracking the conversation. We're going to end promptly at 12:45. Without further ado, I'm going to pass the time over to you, John, for some brief opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and it's an honor to speak to the New York Economic Club. I come to this conversation as someone who started their career working in City Hall, became a journalist, editor-in-chief, Columbia Grad School, Business School, so it's good to see the students online as well, and recently left CNN to run for Congress. And so as bringing all those perspectives to bear, in addition to my work as a historian, I have become increasingly focused on the question of how New York can compete again, how we can build a strong and vital center in New York that doesn't simply defend a stale and frankly failing status quo. And that's what I'd like to talk with you all about today. It's a vision for how we can renew New York. We can build a more independent, strong, and growing state by getting back to building again. And if you take a big step back and you study New York history, I think you can fairly say that we've had several foundations for our growth into the Empire State. Immigration, certainly, trade, transportation, and innovation. And I think we have, it's important to build on those fundamental strengths. You go back to the Flushing Remonstrance, and you see that New York really distinguished itself from other colonies because we were dedicated to trade. We were built on an opportunity economy, open to all as long as they worked hard and played by the rules. And that was different than some of the other projects that were launched in the earliest days of our nation. I think we can see transportation has really helped us grow throughout the state, particularly the Erie Canal. Construction, that form of innovation that has made New York really an inspirational place for people around the world, including my family, grandparents who came through Ellis Island. But as a historian and someone who's working currently on a book on Teddy Roosevelt, you can also see that what had led to the success of the Empire State has led to a degree of stagnation. It is reversible, but we need to confront it clearly. In the first quarter of the 20th century, New York's population doubled. In the first quarter of the 21st century, our population has flatlined, while our budgets in the city and state have more than doubled. We are losing ground in some key competitions with other states like Florida and Texas. And it's important to recognize that people aren't moving there because they like 6-week abortion bans. It's because businesses feel they have a more welcoming reception from local and state government. Taxation in New York State is high, and their perceptions and rooted in reality that the cost of living is lower and the business opportunities are greater. We need to confront that. And I think the way to confront it is to think about embracing the abundance agenda in New York, creating some big moonshot goals to get our swagger back, investments in nuclear energy, which are beginning under Governor Kathy Hochul, as well as high-speed rail. And then finally, I think looking at political reforms that can help build a strong and vital center in our state. If you look at one of the key landmark developments of our state, it was the Erie Canal. And when the Erie Canal was first proposed, it was seen as something, the madness, in the words of Thomas Jefferson. There was no federal government help to build it, but we had a governor who deeply believed in its potential. And in fact, that investment that came through the state, as well as Wall Street, or New York always being the financial capital of the country, paid for itself in tolls and overall economic development revenue within a decade. It was a big, bold move, but it transformed the state. It united us. It increased trade. It made so the upstate wasn't seen as an outlier, and really created the bones of our state's economic success until the railroad transplanted that. There are lessons to be learned from that kind of a moonshot goal. While high-speed rail was first innovated in 1964 by the Japanese, it's famously lagged here in the United States. But I would argue that New York State's one of the few places where it can really work. Imagine being able to connect Buffalo, even potentially Toronto, with New York City, with stops in Syracuse and Albany. That in under 4 hours. That is transformative for the state. And there is progress being made. A new report by the NYU Marin Center, I just interviewed one of its authors on my podcast, How to Fix It, says that we can get a lot of these developments done in 1/10 the cost. There's a momentum report that also details various ways to get this done. It's a big goal. It has been tried before, but it's worth dedicating yourself to big goals, particularly if they're able to bring our state together. Nelson Rockefeller was always fascinated by an idea of connecting Manhattan with Riverhead on Long Island. That would be transformative. That could be done in well under an hour, using in large part the median of the LIE. These are just the kind of big swings we need to take, I think, to get some of our swagger back. And particularly with upstate, I think that upstate New York is likely to be, as many northern states will be, a beneficiary of the climate change that is coming, which will create some pressures on our friends in many deep southern states and in the Southwest. So we need to build ahead to take advantage of that economic transformation. The other thing we need to do is get ahead on energy. Right now, we do import a lot of our energy, but New York needs to be a leader in energy production again. If you look at electrification, how transformative that was to our state, both down on Pearl Street with Thomas Edison and Lower Manhattan, but also Buffalo, the city of light, when Teddy Roosevelt was inaugurated president. And Governor Hochul deserves a great deal of credit, I think, for helping make New York a leader in renewable energy. We've got some wind projects that are, unfortunately, a lot of clean energy technology being cut by the current budget that is being debated in the Senate today. But nuclear power is an area where there is rare and, I believe, welcome bipartisan support. Governor Hochul just announcing the other day a commitment to build a 1 gigawatt nuclear power plant in New York State. But that actually is only part of the equation, because the larger issue is sending a market message that New York State is open for economic investment, specifically when it comes to nuclear development. It is not turnkey, but a lot of the new technologies can be deployed more effectively and efficiently. And in fact, the goal is to actually get 4 new gigawatts up and running. And you can use a lot of the citations of former coal plants as energy production centers to build those new plants. And then you've got to make sure we're investing in a smart grid to get the energy downstate where it's disproportionately used. But that is a good thing that is happening. Governor Hochul deserves a lot of credit for that, but we need to do more. I think in that spirit of doing more, this is where the abundance economy conversation, which has begun to get a lot of rightful attention from the book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, has particular applicability in New York. Particular applicability. The book is largely about California, and there are notes that blue states can take from what is going right, why so many businesses are moving to many red states. And again, it's not because of a broad approval of their social policies. It's because there seems to be an adversarial relationship with many business owners and homeowners from their local government. We have a unique responsibility and I think opportunity to embrace an abundance agenda by really focusing on simplification, on rolling back unnecessary regulation and red tape so we can get back building again. The folks who wrote abundance call it a liberalism that can build. And certainly, if you think back to the fact that the Empire State Building was built in 1 year, you couldn't even begin the permitting and get through the litigation around any new major development. But there's clearly a need to build more housing, to transform some office spaces, to just get back building again. And of course, that will have more of an impact on rebuilding the middle class and addressing the affordability crisis. So these are ideas that we can take in place, but we need to stare squarely in the face why New York has fallen behind in some of the competitions. There's a Stanford economist who has a study called Apples and Oranges, looking at the comparative revenues and expenditures of New York and Florida that I recommend to people, because we need to deal with that. We can't simply be growing our budgets at the rate we are and not really thinking about growing our economy instead and the revenue in that sense. A focus simply on raising taxes and fees seems like managing decline. And that is no way to win. That is true in the history of New York City. That is in the history of New York State. I think all of this also means we need to, I think, embrace a political reform agenda. There's a great organization called Unite New York, which does a voter empowerment index every year. And you'll see supermajority support. I'm talking 75% and up for term limits for state legislators and statewide offices. The organization I have the honor of running as chairman, Citizens Union, once did a study a few years ago showing that people were more likely to leave Albany because of indictment or death than losing an election. We need to encourage more competitive elections. And to that effect, also more than 70% of New Yorkers support open primaries or nonpartisan primaries. This is something that is a clear priority for Citizens Union right now and an opportunity with the Charter Revision Commission that's going forward. They are actively considering this. And I would argue that people who are expressing concern about the results of these closed partisan primary with ranked choice voting, open primaries would empower more than 1 million independent voters to participate in the process. It would change the strategy of candidates running because they would be trying to appeal to the vast majority of New Yorkers in New York City, and rather than just winning one closed partisan primary. And in fact, New York's the outlier here, where 80% of major cities in the United States have some form of open or nonpartisan primary. So these are all things we can do. They are big, broad, animating goals at a time when I think we can use that. I am an unabashed centrist. I believe in a strong and vital center, but that cannot be simply a defense of a stale status quo. We need to have big goals. We need to build on the foundation of what has made our state such a success in the past. We need to do it with determination and optimism, recognizing that the extremes will not lead to the kind of vibrant economy we need. This is a time and place to build on an abundance agenda, to embrace simplification, to embrace some big goals around nuclear power and clean energy transmission and high-speed rail, and political reforms that can actually depolarize our state and get a new generation of people in problem solving together across partisan lines.
Okay. All right.
Katya.
John, how are you? It's good to see you.
I'm doing great. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So I wanna kick it off, kick this off by addressing the elephant in the room, which is, obviously the recent Democratic primary election in New York City and Zohran Mamdani's stunning defeat over the establishment, Democratic candidate, Andrew Cuomo. Mamdani's progressive ideas are clearly resonating with the voters that turned out on Tuesday, particularly the middle class. Our analysis shows that Andrew Cuomo picked up with the upper income voters and also the very low income voters. So the middle class that you're saying we need to rebuild voted for Mamdani, at least on Tuesday. What he's calling for is to address the affordability crisis in New York, but in a matter that is more confrontational with the business interests as opposed to working with them. So what's your read on the outcome and whether New York can square these progressive values and this trend towards progressivism with creating a more competitive economic environment to retain the high taxpayers and the businesses?
Well, as you indicate, there's a fundamental tension there. First of all, I think we should just, in being fair-minded, acknowledge the fact that what Zohran Mamdani was able to do was pull together an extraordinary coalition. He inspired with his style of campaigning, his use of digital campaigning, 30,000 new voters to register. I can't tell you how many times, as journalists, I'm sure you've heard this, and as a candidate too, consultants being dismissive of the youth vote, often discussed, rarely materialized. Zohran Mamdani succeeded in inspiring, of getting people to register, to turn out to vote in New York's closed Democratic primary. And by clearing 40%, he would have won even in the old system before ranked choice voting. But I think it's important, just as a reality check, if you will, to recognize that he still only won the support of 10% of New York's total registered voters, which is another reason why I think it's so urgent to have the Charter Revision Commission move forward with open primaries and even year elections. Representative elections have representative results. I also think, though, that it shouldn't be seen as simply an effort to change the rules to forego a certain outcome, because 50% of registered independent voters in New York City, which, by the way, is the only party affiliation, quote unquote, that is rising in New York City, are under the age of 40. So it could very well have been he would be able to inspire those folks as well. When you get to the policies in place, and this is, coming from someone who's worked in City Hall and covered politics, I think one of the problems, and this is a major theme in the abundance agenda, is that you have a modern progressivism that often seems to work against market forces rather than with them. That is not a recipe for long-term success. It may be a recipe for short-term political popularity, but this is where I think the rising tide of populism and the sort of every action creates an equal and opposite reaction between, populism on the far right and increasingly on the far left is at odds with how economies actually work and how our state has actually grown. If you want to build the middle class, if you want to deal with the affordability crisis, which is real, and I think he focused like a laser beam on affordability, and he had authenticity. He also played offense in his campaign. And I think, Andrew Cuomo looked at the polls and held back. He was not playing offense as much, and that didn't help him, and obviously had his own baggage. But nonetheless, the most experienced candidate who's run for mayor lost to objectively the least experience, someone who has actually very little experience even working in the private sector, let alone running an organization. So I think when you have these ideas and you have folks talking now, well, he doesn't have the ability to do what he wants to do. The MTA's got to do free buses. The city council can't raise the minimum wage. Nonetheless, I think you need to deal with the fact that these ideas matter. It is a strong mayor form of government. It is an incredibly big and complex city government, and our city is uniquely dependent on the business community and indeed a very small number of taxpayers to bring in the majority of revenue. So if you want to deal with the affordability crisis, you need to incentivize the building of more housing. That means reducing regulation and red tape, not adding to it. That is where that's where I think you have a contradiction that's likely to not end well. So give credit where credit's due with his ability to inspire a new generation to turn out. There's a lot to learn, but at the same time, we need to be clear-eyed about the ideas he's advancing and whether they will, the ideas that are meant to help affordability could end up compounding those problems going forward.
Well, I guess it ain't over till it's over. So
Nope.
Is there still a chance for the vital center that, that you wrote of and you spoke of to win in November?
Yes. I think that we're likely to see in New York, and it's one more reason why I think there should be urgency around the Charter Revision Commission, which is currently debating this within themselves, whether they will move forward with proposals that Citizens Union has been actively advocating for a long time, as have I, as a columnist, open primaries and even year elections. One of the things we're likely to see if we have 3 or 4 or possibly 5 general election mayoral candidates. You have Mayor Adams running as an independent, of course, currently Curtis Sliwa as a Republican, Jim Walden running as an independent, and Andrew Cuomo keeping his ballot line. What that means is that we are likely to have not just a competitive general election, which is welcome in the spirit of increasing participation. Turnouts are generally higher in general elections than closed partisan primaries. But also, we're increasing a likelihood that the next mayor of New York will not have majority support. That's not good. That is not good for the mayor. It's not good for the city. And so if you think about the opportunities for an open primary with ranked choice voting, and then maybe it's top 2, maybe it's top 3 or 4, but which would say top 3 would allow, left, right, and center choice, presumably in most cases. And that then would allow RCV to have a maximum impact in a general election. But we're looking at something that is quite different. I think it's unhealthy to have the mayor of New York chosen in any single partisan primary. But it's especially unhealthy to potentially have a situation where the next mayor doesn't have majority support of the city, particularly if they're embarking on a strong ideological agenda. I believe that mayors are best when they are non-ideological problem solvers. As Fiorello LaGuardia famously said, there's no Republican, Democrat, or socialist, because he was a Republican socialist, we should remind people, on those ballot lines, way to clean the streets. It is a delivery job. It is a leadership job. It is an executive job. And that tends not to work if people are pushing ideological agendas.
So do you think there's the opportunity for Adams to stage an actual, Mayor Eric Adams to actually gain from some of Cuomo's losses?
It depends whether Cuomo stays in. Look, Eric Adams has a lot of ethical baggage. Citizens Union called for him to step down because he compromised, in our view, the integrity of the mayor's office with a apparent deal no longer in place, thanks to a judge with the Trump Justice Department. But if you have, three candidates splitting the moderate vote, then that opens the door to someone on more on the extremes. And we should say that's not even pejorative, right? I mean, a lot of times Republicans reflexively call everyone from Bill Clinton to Barack Obama a socialist. It's bunk, it's BS. But in this case, this is a self-identified democratic socialist. It is unclear that a majority of New Yorkers would support that direction. But if you splinter the vote, then that creates an opportunity for that kind of person to come in. And again, we'll need to see whether he pivots, whether he reaches out. But when people say who they are, this is a general rule, believe them.
There is a lot of chatter, of course, that, should Mamdani win in the fall, then this will jumpstart another one of those exoduses that you talked about out of the city's biggest taxpayers. The reality, though, and you did mention this, is the mayor has limited power. Much of the policies that he wants to enact have to be done out of Albany. And in your calling for legislators to pursue some of these big moonshot projects that would unify the state, like high-speed rail, is there a chance instead that they will be persuaded to spend that money on some of the measures that Mamdani is calling for?
That is always that is one of the challenges we face, right? I mean, right now, the assembly is, I think, decidedly to the left of many of our statewide elected officials who are fellow Democrats. Budgets are choices. Again, just look at the fact that we have much more than doubled our budgets in New York City and state over the past quarter century, well above the rate of inflation. While our state in 2023 lost more than 240,000 residents. I don't think there are many New Yorkers who would say we're getting twice the value we did from 20 odd years ago. And so, look, I mean, elections have consequences. I think you want to work with market forces, and government has a role to play, particularly in public-private partnerships, to get big things done. But if there's an adversarial relationship with the private sector, that's precarious in an environment that is increasingly competitive. States compete for investment. They compete for business investment, and people vote with their feet. As Mike Bloomberg often pointed out, that the city is disproportionately dependent. And this is a symptom of a broader economic stratification, which is part of why we need to rebuild a strong middle class again in New York City and state. But I think 1% of taxpayers pay 50% of tax revenues. So acting cavalierly that people can't vote with their feet and move to a lower tax state, is not likely to end up well. You want to grow the tax base by growing the economy of our city and state. That's the way to get more revenues, not to be looking for constantly new taxes and fees. That's managing decline. That is no way to win. We've seen this movie before. And indeed, pay close attention to a recent documentary, a new book about how New York almost went bankrupt in the mid-'70s. Richard Farley has a new book and a new documentary called Drop Dead City. This is why, as Harry Truman once said, the only thing new in the world is the history you don't know. And it's worth looking back at that and taking it seriously and looking at when we've succeeded, why we've succeeded.
Beyond the expenditure here, what is the biggest obstacle, in your opinion, to the pursuit of these moonshot goals in Albany, and how would we address that?
Well, I think first of all, obviously there is the reason I think the abundance agenda is particularly applicable is we have more than our share of red tape, regulation, and litigation. And with those, we would not be able to get many of the big things we've done in the past done. But it does take leadership. It does take audacious goals. Again, the Erie Canal was dismissed as impossible before it was done, but paid for itself within a decade. But you do need to look at what Josh Shapiro just did with I-95. That was only possible to repair it as quickly as he did because he declared an emergency, which that objectively was. I'm not advocating that executives start getting promiscuous about declaring emergencies. That could have many unintended and unwelcome consequences. But it's important to inspire people around a big vision. And here's where I think, Kathy Hochul, Governor Hochul, by really getting in front from having a New York State lead in clean energy production. We've got great national labs that are doing a lot of innovative work. We've got wind facilities that are now coming under attack from the federal government, which I think will be to our great detriment. But with nuclear, there is an opportunity to hit our state's goals of zero emissions by 2040. That focuses the mind. And if we start really investing aggressively in that and using the upstate sites, particularly on the sites of former coal production plants, I think, and upgrade the transmission, that's what we need to do to be able to take advantage of the next waves of innovation, like AI and quantum. So don't get stuck into you will not actually help the long-term affordability crisis and building the middle class if we don't get back building again and be ambitious about that.
It was just 4 years ago that New York shut down Indian Point,
Yes.
the nuclear power plant just north of the city, after opposition from environmentalists and safety advocates. I mean, the result was an increased dependence on natural gas. Do you think the climate change issues and NIMBYism backdrop have sufficiently shifted that Governor Hochul's plan to build a new nuclear facility will actually succeed this time?
I think the national conversation has shifted. You have started hearing more about YIMBYism than NIMBYism. I think there are ways you need to preserve the historic character of communities, and indeed with siting nuclear power plants in particular. We had this experience with Shoreham on Long Island. Siting matters. A lot of the conversation around Indian Point was in the wake of 9/11, something I, was lived up close. That location was problematic because of the density. That said, I would have argued that if you're going to shut down that plant, it should have been done in conjunction of saying, fine, we'll build 3 more in less populated areas and invest in improving the transmission. That's the trade-off that should have been made, because this is one of those happy coincidences where it's good for the environment and it's good for the kind of energy leadership role that we need to face. We can't be as dependent as a state on outside entities, particularly in this political environment. We need to grow strength and independence, and increasing our energy production as a way to do that, while also being able to take full advantage of the industries of the future that are coming down the pike real fast. So yeah, I think while that citation was problematic, and you need to take that into account, I think in exchange for closing that, you should have built 3 more.
I want to ask also how the abundance agenda, in your view, addresses the question of affordability. And I do understand, right? A lot of this is about the business sector, but how do we directly address the issues that are facing New Yorkers in real time, that are driving them in part to leave, even if they're not the highest tax-paying portion of the city? They're just even leaving just to go nearby, to go to New Jersey, to go to Connecticut, to go elsewhere where their needs can be more easily met.
Well, this is where 2 key things to keep in mind are it's the cost of living and the quality of life. And this is why quality of life and quality of life policing strategies can have such a positive impact. And I want to hasten to say it has nothing to do with plainclothes units or stop and frisk. This is about broken windows theory and making sure that you're not allowing low-level civic decline, because that's what drives people out of New York and other major cities. I think the abundance agenda makes it really clear that there has been, it's the cost of good intentions, right? A lot of the environmental regulation, which was absolutely honorable and kicked into place in the 60s, 70s, particularly 70s and 80s, ended up creating a thicket of regulation that makes it impossible to build again. If you look at, for example, the states that have some of the highest homelessness rates, they also have the lowest levels of affordable housing. And so I think that the authors call it a liberalism that builds. You have to be able to build. If you can get back building again, you will ultimately lower costs. You will address affordability, and that construction will also create good paying jobs, many of them union jobs. And that is healthy as well for our economy. If you deal with, lowering the cost of living, improving the quality of life, which I will hasten to say high-speed rail on Long Island and upstate would do by also expanding the aperture of where people can live. These are big goals, but we shouldn't shy away from big goals. If we become obsessed with small things, we end up becoming small ourselves, and we need to get the big things right.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of the private sector in pursuing some of these bigger projects? How do you envision that, or some examples that you might have in mind?
Look, I think the public-private partnerships work in many countries around the world. One of the ways the high-speed rail is built is that some of the upfront costs are actually taken on by the people doing the construction to run the lines. This was the story of some of the early New York subway system that would recoup some of their initial investment to lower taxpayer exposure over a set period of time. Public-private partnerships work as long as there's a high degree of transparency and accountability. And so I do think, you're already seeing, what I think has been underreported in Governor Hochul's announcement about the 1 gigawatt nuclear power reactor is that its intention is to send a broader market message that New York is going to be encouraging the development of more clean energy and nuclear power. It is not a turnkey, as you well know, even though some of the smaller modular reactors can get up and running faster. It's about sending a market message that the state isn't going to be obstructionist. And that is one of the things that I think blue states need to learn from red state economies. Again, nobody's moving to Texas or Florida because they like a 6-week abortion ban. They're moving because they feel they have a less adversarial relationship with the state when it comes to their business, when it comes to moving their family, that creates a lower cost of living and higher quality of life. So if you really care about lowering the cost of living and making sure we heal some of these economic divides, we got to get back building again.
I want to turn to some questions that have come in from the audience, if that's okay with you.
Please.
We've gotten quite a few.
Yeah.
So the first is, just kind of building on this point that you just made, but what can the governor of New York do to help New York City, as well as in this audience member's concern, quash the next mayor who, if it is indeed a socialist?
Well, look, I wrote a book called Wingnuts a few years ago, and I opened the book with an epigraph of John Wayne saying that he didn't vote for John F. Kennedy, famous conservative, voted for Richard Nixon, but he was now his president, and he hoped it succeeds. And I contrasted that with Rush Limbaugh saying at CPAC about then President-elect Obama, I hope he fails. We should all hope our elected leaders succeed, but we need to be clear-eyed about what they are proposing and take them seriously. And again, not fall into this idea that, he doesn't have the power to do what he wants to do. The governor, a lot of New York City, while we have a strong mayor system, does run through Albany. The MTA that is more of a governor's issue. People get in the subway and they want to blame the mayor, but really it's the MTA that's in charge. The governor has a lot of leadership role in terms of what happens in the city. So I would not lull yourself into saying, well, he can't do anything he's talking about, and he's a great communicator and an energizing figure from a new generation, which he is. Take the ideas seriously, but understand that there is a lot a governor can do, because a lot of what makes New York City run actually goes through Albany and the governor's mansion. You can't unilaterally, the city council, I think, once raised the minimum wage on its own, and that was struck down in court. Again, we do need to take rebuilding the middle seriously. That needs to be an animating idea, but a lot does through who is governor matters enormously. And I think, we have had, we need a strong center left in the state to be the reform party in effect, and to be a check on the extremes.
I guess there's a question on Mamdani's policies. Of course, rent freeze, city-owned grocery stores, free buses. Are there any policies that you believe are actually doable, tackleable, and would be good for the city?
Great question. Look, I think my understanding of why he wants city-owned grocery stores is not to make us more like Poland in 1965, but because he's trying to address food deserts. I would argue a better way to do that would be to incentivize private companies that actually run grocery stores to come into those spaces. And indeed, one of the ways to do that historically, we've seen, if you look at the redevelopment of Harlem, which occurred primarily under the 20 years of Giuliani and Bloomberg, crime came down, economic development went up, largely through incentives plans, some of which have now been federalized, and then grocery. Then you got some of the basics that had been denied to that community. But it's better, I think, to work with private sector than to say you're going to counteract that. Free buses is appealing in some respects. I think free Wi-Fi on buses would be a better place, but again, it needs to go through the MTA, and you can't simply dismiss how you're going to pay for it. Again, if you get in a game where your vision for the city and state is just what taxes or fees to raise, you're missing the larger plot, especially in a place where we're too dependent on a relatively small number of people who can quite easily pack up and move to another state. You need to figure out how to grow the larger economy. That's how you best raise revenue. We're already 49th in cumulative tax burden. There's not a lot of place to go, but that you lean into that, you're not going to end up any place good, because people and businesses will vote with their feet. And that needs to be taken very seriously. We need to be out competing other states. That's a recipe for losing those fights, no matter what sort of ideological fantasia you want to apply.
There's a question on, wouldn't Cuomo be the candidate that most satisfies the criteria of a non-ideological problem solver? Among state governors, he dealt with COVID. He got a lot of praise for his dealing with parts of COVID, and of course, a lot of criticism for the nursing home scandal. But how do you view Cuomo's chances, I guess, going forward after Tuesday's performance?
Look, he had been leading in the polls for quite some time, partly on name ID. He obviously brings unique baggage as well as unique experience. I mean, objectively, we've never had a mayoral candidate as experienced, by which I mean someone who was HUD secretary, someone who was governor, who knows how to deal with the federal government, knows how to deal with the Albany, and has a reputation for being, tough and competent, particularly in the realm of building. But he did bring a lot of baggage with him, and a lot of people clearly reacted against that. Also, I think strategically, because he saw he was ahead in the polls, he thought he could run a bit of a rose garden strategy. I always think it's wiser to play. I think the best defense is playing offense. And Mondami really was out there. He was talking to people. He was talking to reporters. He was walking the island of Manhattan. Look, that kind of optimistic playing offense works politically. And Adams can point to some, crime is going down. I think we're on track to a record low number of murders. I think that's disproportionately due to Jessica Tisch reapplying some of the basic philosophies of quality of life policing and broken windows theory that work. And so those two will be duking it out a bit. And again, got Jim Walden running as an independent as well. But clearly, something's got to give. One of those folks needs to move into pole position, and I anticipate a vigorous and healthy race. It's good to have a competitive general election. We shouldn't decide elections in close partisan primaries. But what we should really take away is that there is urgency to have open primaries and even year elections now. And that is 100% within this city council's power if they have the courage to pursue it and not be cowed to back down.
Mamdani also gained the support and the endorsements of a couple famous progressives, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, of course. Where do you see how those endorsements will play in the general election? Do you think those will help him or hurt him?
They certainly helped, obviously, in the Democratic primary. And again, I think it's, a lot of the twin issues, and this is sort of stylistic, but also substantive. It's affordability is the substance, but authenticity is the style. And I think, authenticity is key, as is dealing with affordability, but how you deal with it is more important. Look, AOC and is smart and a compelling communicator, and has become a national figure, but it is not definitionally an executive role. Bernie Sanders was the mayor of Burlington. but has not been in an executive role for a long time. Executive responsibilities are fundamentally different. It's not just speaking well and making people feel good. It's about getting things done. And the stakes couldn't be higher, particularly right now. I mean, you saw President Trump, basically threatening the city of New York, saying if, he doesn't like who's mayor, he's going to cut funding. Don't overreact to the threat, but be clear about the need to be tough and strong to confront that kind of threat and to get New York City in a place where it is strong and vibrant on its own, where we are not dependent. The Moynihan Report famously, Senator Moynihan, one of my heroes, always pointed out that New York State gave more to the federal government than we got, when a lot of these sort of red state senators get more than they give and then rail against the federal government all the time. But we do, the executive responsibilities are fundamentally different. And that's what I would encourage people to keep in mind. He's been an assemblyman. The youth isn't the issue. It's a lack of experience in the private sector and running things. And that's a legitimate conversation. Zellner Myrie, who was running the state senator, has a very accomplished record in Albany, particularly on a lot of election reform issues. More so than Mamdani, but Mamdani caught fire, I think, because there's a pendulum swing energy around the progressive left. But you need to work with market forces to get those, to actually address the affordability crisis and rebuild the middle class.
So final question from an audience member. You have a Unitarian stance. Why not run for mayor of New York City yourself, or governor?
Well, I just ran for Congress, and I'd sat where you sat for many years, and ultimately I felt that I didn't want to look at the last election and talk about it on TV. I do think we have an obligation eventually to put our ideas into action. I love writing history books. I'm having a lot of fun with Teddy Roosevelt right now. But I do think it's about learning from the past and applying those lessons to our present so we can build a better future, recognizing that defense of the status quo and drift is actually dangerous if we care about defending our democracy and making sure that we hand our state and our city to the next generation better than it was handed to us. And New York needs to take that responsibility seriously. And we need to build a strong and vital center. And I think that needs to be the Reform Party in New York. If it's de facto defending the status quo, that is no way to succeed. So, this is part of my effort with Chairman of Citizens Union to let's put these ideas into action. Let's learn the right lessons from our history, and let's push back against the extremes so we can start succeeding again.
Doesn't sound like you ruled it out. All right, John. Well, thank you so much for taking this time with us. It's been a great conversation.
Appreciate it, Katya. Thank you, New York Economic.
Thank you
Barbara.
both. Really inspiring, and I guess keep up the good work, finding that middle. So thank you both again. And this wraps up our series of events for the season, unless we get called back next month for something, based on what's happening in Washington. But we do hope that everyone has a great summer. But as we start to prepare for the summer, I do want to mention we have a robust lineup of speakers for the fall already confirmed. John Williams, the former club chair and CEO of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, will kick off in September, followed by Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York. Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader of the House, will be joining us. Charles Scharf, the CEO of Wells Fargo. Beth Hammock of the Cleveland Federal Reserve Bank. And then Nikolai Tangent, the CEO of Norges Bank Investment Management, will be joining us, and many more. So please do stay tuned. And before we close, we always like to recognize those attending that are from the nearly 400 members of our Centennial Society, whose generous contributions provide vital support for our mission and programming. And thank you. So to all who joined this afternoon, thank you, and please enjoy the rest of your day. And John and Katya, thank you so much. It was a terrific conversation. Really very much appreciate you all joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.